Picture this. It's like 9 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Oh, I know this feeling already.
Right. You are sitting on your couch. You've got the harsh glow of your laptop just illuminating your face, and you're staring at your inbox.
Yep, the dreaded inbox.
And there is a tense email sitting right there at the top of the screen.
Just waiting for you.
Exactly. Maybe it's from a stakeholder or a client or, well, if you're an educator, maybe it's this deeply critical message from a parent or an administrator.
And your body just reacts.
Yes. You feel this visceral, physical reaction. Your heart rate spikes.
The chest gets tight.
Yeah, your chest tightens. You feel this crushing, suffocating weight, like the absolute exhaustion of feeling entirely personally responsible for someone else's lack of effort.
It's the worst because you're working, substantially harder than they are.
Exactly. But somehow, by some twisted logic of the system you're in, you are the one being held accountable for the fact that they aren't succeeding.
Yeah. And that physical reaction you're describing, that's essentially the body's response to an impossible mandate.
An impossible mandate?
Right. Because it's that precise intersection where your professional identity and really your personal empathy, they collide with systemic dysfunction.
Which leaves you just completely depleted.
Fundamentally depleted.
And that exact knot in your stomach, that's our focus today. We are taking a deep dive into a framework called the Peaceful Educator.
Which is such a great title.
It really is. Our mission today is to explore how to escape this modern burnout trap through this radical, profoundly counterintuitive concept known as responsibility realignment.
Right.
And I want to set the stage right away for you listening. While our source material today is tailored specifically for classroom teachers who are, frankly, facing an epidemic of burnout and moral injury.
A massive epidemic, yeah.
The core psychology here, the shift from trying to own the outcome to strictly owning the environment, it's going to fundamentally change how you operate if you are in any kind of leadership, management, mentoring, or honestly, parenting role.
Absolutely. Because if you manage human beings in any capacity, the psychology of burnout is universal.
Yeah. We have to look at the root cause of why highly empathetic, highly driven professionals hit that wall of sheer exhaustion.
And to understand that mechanism, the sources point us to the research of Madigan and Kim.
Right, on this psychological phenomenon called role conflict.
Role conflict. Yeah, break that down for us.
So at its core, role conflict is this severe chronic stress that happens when a human being attempts to control variables that are entirely outside of their actual sphere of influence.
So it's basically the cognitive dissonance of trying to control the uncontrollable.
Exactly. And Madigan and Kim's data points to this as a leading predictor of professional attrition. People just leave.
And they just quit. And in education, this manifests in incredibly painful ways, right?
Absolutely.
It looks like a teacher trying to single-handedly control a student's intrinsic apathy or trying to manage the really complex dysfunction of a student's home life.
Or attempting to patch up these massive societal-level failures all from a single classroom.
Right. You end up adopting this persona of savior, fixer, ultimate authority. Yeah, but taking on that role puts you in direct, violent conflict with the reality of your actual influence.
Because you simply cannot force another autonomous human being to care.
You can't. And yet, every systemic pressure tells you that you should be able to.
Which the framework identifies as the hero-teacher myth.
The hero-teacher myth.
Right.
It's a deeply ingrained cultural narrative.
Yeah. If we look at how society measures the value of an educator, or really any care-based professional, it is almost entirely predicated on their willingness to absorb systemic failure.
Yes. The implicit expectation is that you have to sacrifice your personal boundaries, your mental health, your weekends.
Your family time.
Exactly. All to carry the emotional and academic weight of every single person in your charge.
It's toxic. It's a toxic conditioning. We see it in every movie, every TV show about education.
The good teacher is the martyr.
Right. If you aren't sacrificing yourself, if you aren't pulling an 80-hour work week, well, you're somehow failing the kids.
And pedagogically, the sources point out that this martyr complex translates directly into what they call the transmitter persona.
The sage on the stage.
Yeah, the transmitter is the educator who is doing absolutely all the heavy cognitive lifting in the room.
They stand at the front, just projecting immense energy, trying to literally pour facts into the students' heads.
Right, micromanaging every tiny behavior and absorbing total ownership of the final result.
So if a student fails the test, the transmitter internalizes it not as, a lack of student preparation, but as a personal moral failing.
They literally tell themselves, well, I just didn't transmit hard enough.
Yeah. And the irony, of course, is what the data actually reveals about this approach.
Right, because the transmitter model leads to massive, unsustainable exhaustion for the professional, but it actually yields lower achievement.
And lower engagement from the student.
Because the student is entirely passive in that dynamic. They aren't doing the work.
Right. I was thinking about this dynamic, and it reminds me of an analogy. It's like a captain trying to sail a ship by standing on the deck and physically blowing on the sails themselves.
Oh, that's a great image.
You know, you are hyperventilating, you're turning blue, your lungs are just burning, and the boat is barely moving an inch.
Yeah. It's an illusion of control that completely destroys the person attempting it.
Exactly.
And pushing that analogy a step further, if you are the one exhausting yourself blowing on the sails, you also aren't teaching your crew how to navigate.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You are guaranteeing that they will sink the absolute second you step off the boat. You've basically abandoned your actual role as the captain to perform this impossible performative task.
Which begs the question, right, if blowing on the sails guarantees we burn out and guarantees the crew learns nothing, how do we redraw these boundaries?
How do we get the ship moving without destroying ourselves?
Exactly. And the framework hinges on a foundational psychological shift here, a complete realignment of responsibility. And the entire philosophy is anchored by one specific, non-negotiable mantra. I own the environment, they own the effort.
I own the environment, they own the effort. That is the dividing line between surviving this profession and being totally consumed by it.
Break that down for us. What does owning the environment actually mean?
It means you are the architect of the space. Your professional obligation is to provide absolute clarity, a psychologically safe environment, high-quality, accessible instruction, and really precise feedback.
Right. That's the environment.
That is your environment. But the student, the client, the employee, they possess complete ownership of their engagement.
So once you have built that high-quality, accessible space, you have to systematically detach from the emotional burden of their apathy.
Exactly. And this isn't just some defensive posture to make tired teachers feel better either.
No, the sources root this firmly in Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory.
Right. Humans do not develop intrinsic motivation when they are being micromanaged or coerced.
Yeah, if you are terrified of a student failing, and so you do the work for them, or you're just hovering over them constantly, you are actively crushing their autonomy.
And Deci and Ryan's research proves that autonomy-supportive environments, where the choice to engage is genuinely left up to the individual, those are the only environments that cultivate authentic, long-term motivation.
Which perfectly aligns with the framework's push toward what they term the pedagogy of humility.
Right, the pedagogy of humility. It's that intentional shift from the exhausting transmitter to the role of the activator.
And if we look at John Hattie's meta-analyses on visible learning,
Which is gold standard, yeah.
right, we know that an effect size of 0.40 represents a standard year of growth.
Yeah, and teachers who operate as activators, meaning they curate the environment, they provide the tools, and then humbly step back to force the student to do the cognitive heavy lifting.
They consistently hit massive effect sizes of 0.60 or higher.
Stepping back actually produces the growth.
It does. But okay, let's pause here. Because while Hattie's data is undeniable, the reality of applying this in a modern classroom creates massive friction.
Oh, absolutely.
I can hear the pushback from our listeners right now. If a student walks into your room dealing with severe, complex trauma, or they are navigating extreme food insecurity or an undiagnosed learning disability.
Right, the reality for so many kids.
Yeah, looking at that student and saying, I own the environment, they own the effort, it feels incredibly cold. Doesn't that framework fundamentally lack empathy? Aren't we abandoning the most vulnerable kids?
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
And that tension you're identifying is exactly why the framework introduces the concept of radical realism.
Radical realism, okay.
Yeah, to resolve the friction between holding boundaries and having empathy, we have to recognize the vital distinction between being sensitive and being responsible.
Okay, let's unpack that distinction, sensitive versus responsible, because those get conflated all the time.
Dangerously conflated, yeah.
Okay.
Sensitivity is the empathy. Sensitivity is looking at the student navigating trauma or systemic barriers and deeply, genuinely acknowledging that reality.
Right.
And because of that sensitivity, you alter the environment. You provide the scaffold.
Like providing an audio version of a text or a quiet, low-stimulation space to work.
Exactly. Or maybe a flexible deadline. You are being highly sensitive to their reality by meticulously modifying the environment that you own.
Because building those access points is entirely within my control.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But responsibility is an entirely different mechanism.
Okay.
Having empathy does not equate to absorbing the natural consequences of a student's chronic disengagement. We honor a student's human dignity by maintaining high expectations and realistic goals.
So the student must still provide the effort to cross the finish line.
They have to.
Yeah.
If our response to trauma is to lower the academic bar to the floor, or to quietly just do the work for them to avoid conflict, we aren't being empathetic. We're being enablers.
Yeah.
We are stripping them of their agency and basically guaranteeing they leave our system completely unprepared for reality.
That is such a profound reframing. It's like, okay, sensitivity is recognizing a student is in a wheelchair and building a ramp instead of stairs.
Yes, great analogy.
But responsibility is recognizing that even with a perfectly constructed ramp, you cannot push them up it if they are actively pulling the brakes.
Right. You build the ramp, you ensure it's structurally sound and accessible, but they must utilize their own effort to move upward.
And knowing that you built the optimal ramp allows you to step back without guilt.
Exactly. Without guilt.
So the obvious next question is, how do we practically build those ramps?
Right.
How do we construct an environment so rigorous and accessible that we can confidently basically wash our hands of the outcome?
The framework offers two distinct pedagogical strategies for this: conceptual primacy and dignified differentiation.
Let's look at conceptual primacy first. The sources describe this as an active rejection of the textbook race.
Oh, the textbook race.
Yeah.
Every teacher knows exactly what this means.
Right. That frantic, anxiety-inducing sprint in May to cover every single disconnected fact in the curriculum before the final exam.
The mile-wide, inch-deep paradigm.
Yes.
It's basically a defense mechanism. We race through the textbook because it gives us the illusion of having taught everything.
But conceptual primacy, which draws heavily on H. Lynn Erickson's model of 3D instruction, demands we shift from textbook coverage to conceptual uncovering.
You stop obsessing over rote facts and start teaching universal big ideas.
And the example in the sources clarifies this beautifully. Instead of forcing a struggling student to memorize 20 isolated battle dates from the American Civil War.
Which requires massive working memory and yields very little real-world value.
Exactly. Instead of that, you use the Civil War as a case study to teach the universal, timeless concept of conflict as a catalyst for change.
Right. The dates, the specific generals, the maps, those are just the vehicle.
Yeah. Understanding why human conflict inevitably creates societal change, that is the actual destination.
And when you prioritize the destination over the vehicle, you suddenly unlock incredible flexibility in how a student gets there.
Right, because if the goal is strictly memorizing the date of Gettysburg, there is only one way to succeed.
Exactly. But if the goal is understanding conflict as a catalyst, you can offer multiple pathways. And this is where dignified differentiation comes in.
Yes, dignified differentiation. The framework argues forcefully against the traditional model of watering down content for struggling learners.
Right. Lowering cognitive expectations to make things easier is an affront to human dignity.
You don't simplify the concept, you vary the access point.
You keep the universal concept identical for every single person in the room, but you provide different doors to enter that concept.
The sources outline 3 specific doors you can build into your environment.
Let's go through them.
First, the academic door. This is your high-level reading, your complex primary sources, the traditional text-heavy approach.
Yep, the standard.
Second is the narrative door. This involves engaging with the high-level concept through story and character. They specifically mention utilizing narrative-level resources, like collections from S.W. Smith books, which take complex historical or social ideas and weave them into highly accessible, engaging narratives without losing the intellectual rigor.
Which is huge for engagement.
Right. And then third is the visual door. This is for the student who needs to see the concept mapped out spatially, using graphic organizers, concept maps, or rich visual representations.
And when we look at the data behind why offering those 3 doors works, it maps seamlessly onto Universal Design for Learning, or UDL.
Yeah, UDL is fascinating.
It posits a massive paradigm shift. The disability, or the barrier to learning, does not live inside the student. The barrier lives in the environment.
That reframes everything. The barrier is in the environment.
Right. If I mandate that the only way to prove an understanding of justice is to read a densely formatted 40-page legal brief, and I hand that to a student with dyslexia, the dyslexia isn't the barrier.
The massive block of text is the barrier.
Exactly. If I offer that exact same student the narrative door or the visual door to explore the identical concept of justice, I haven't lowered my standards. I have simply removed the environmental friction.
You have provided equitable access.
Exactly.
So, okay, you've built this beautiful, accessible space. You are utilizing conceptual primacy. You have constructed the academic, narrative, and visual doors. You have done your job,
Yep.
but we have to address the elephant in the room. What happens when a student sits down, looks at the three perfectly designed doors, puts their head on the desk, and simply refuses to engage?
Right. The nightmare scenario.
And the modern educational instinct is to panic. We have developed this pervasive, almost corporate failure to fail culture.
Oh, absolutely.
We've imported a customer service mindset into education, where a student failing a class is viewed inherently as a failure of the teacher's service delivery.
It is a profound blame culture. If a student disengages, the immediate reflexive response from administration, and often from parents, is to interrogate the teacher.
What didn't you do? Why didn't you engage them? What is your intervention plan?
Right. And this relentless pressure creates a massive chilling effect. Teachers are terrified of the friction, so they artificially inflate grades.
They accept incredibly late work. They push students through the system regardless of actual mastery.
Entirely to avoid the guilt and the conflict.
But the framework offers a really uncomfortable yet incredibly liberating reframe on what a failing grade actually is.
It really does.
A failing grade is not a moral catastrophe. It is not an indictment of your worth as a human being or your skill as an educator. A failing grade is simply a neutral, factual data point.
Yes. It is a clean measurement of engagement. If you have rigorously provided those three access points, and the student autonomously chooses not to utilize them, the resulting failure is merely the factual reflection of that choice.
Right.
Shielding a student from the natural consequences of their own apathy is not kindness. It is an active disruption of their psychological development.
Conceptually, I think most educators would agree with that. The friction comes in the application.
Of course.
Because when that angry parent emails you at 9 p.m., or the principal calls you into the office demanding to know why Johnny has an F, calmly explaining that his grade is a neutral data point is not going to protect you from their wrath.
No, it is not.
So how do we practically operationalize this? How do we build a shield against the blame?
Well, the framework provides a very specific mechanism for this, called the Reasonable Effort Shield, utilizing a tool called the pulse sheet.
The pulse sheet. Okay, explain the pulse sheet.
It's an exercise in ruthless emotional detachment. It's just a simple tracking grid. When a student misses a step in the learning process, they don't turn in a milestone, they refuse to do the reading, you do not agonize over it.
You don't chase them down the hallway.
Exactly. You simply mark an M for missed milestone on your grid.
Just an M.
Just an M. That M is a factual, emotionless data point. And the moment that M is recorded, you execute the inform and move on protocol.
Document, inform, move on. It's almost algorithmic.
It really is.
Step 1 is documenting the M. Step 2 is inform. And this is where the magic happens. You do not write a long, defensive, emotional essay apologizing for the student's grade.
Please don't do that.
You send a highly factual, standardized template. The framework gives us the exact language. It sounds like this. I have provided a dignified differentiation access point, specifically the visual map for this week's concept. The student has chosen not to engage with it. Therefore, the next step for mastery resides with the student.
It is beautifully sterile.
It is. And step 3 is move on. You literally hit send, mentally release the outcome, and close the laptop.
You have fulfilled your professional duty to the environment. The outcome is now squarely on their shoulders.
I want to focus on the psychology of sending that message early and often, too. Because by executing inform and move on the moment a milestone is missed, you are actively transferring the emotional weight, the anxiety, and the urgency of that failing grade out of your body and putting it back into the student's home in real time.
Yes. You aren't waiting until the end of the semester to drop a bomb.
Exactly. You are establishing a real-time boundary. So if administration questions you later, you aren't defensive. You simply point to the factual record of your reasonable effort.
But we have to acknowledge the reality of what happens when we transfer that responsibility back. Holding a boundary almost always triggers an extinction burst from the people used to you absorbing their responsibilities.
Oh, 100%.
So what happens when you send that highly factual email and the parent replies with hostility, or a stakeholder calls you, starts raising their voice, and aggressively demands that you lower your standard or grant an unearned exception?
This brings us to the hardest but most vital part of the framework: professional advocacy and safety.
Yeah.
Because the hero teacher model has insidiously normalized a level of professionalism that would literally result in immediate termination or legal action in any other corporate or medical field.
Oh, without a doubt.
Teachers are routinely expected to sit quietly and absorb verbal abuse, screaming parents, and what the sources accurately describe as administrative gaslighting, all weaponized under the banner of doing what's best for the kids.
Right. And the framework draws an absolute non-negotiable line in the sand here. Abuse is not in your contract.
Abuse is not in your contract.
It is a fundamental truth that the system wants you to forget. You are a highly educated, degreed professional.
I'm going to say it again because it needs to be the bedrock of every educator's mindset.
Yeah.
Abuse is not in your contract.
Yeah.
Self-sacrifice is not a pedagogical strategy. Right. There is a massive objective difference between navigating a difficult, emotionally charged conversation and being subjected to unprofessional conduct.
And a peaceful educator recognizes that difference immediately. They do not attempt to win a screaming match.
Right.
They do not get defensive, and they do not try to justify their pedagogy to someone who's acting abusively. They simply enforce their professional standards.
Let's make this highly practical. I want to do a micro role play right now to demonstrate the specific script the sources provide.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's imagine we are sitting in a parent-teacher conference. I am playing the parent. I am furious that my child is failing. My voice gets louder. I start pointing my finger at you across the table, and I aggressively question your competence because you refuse to just give my child extra credit to bump their grade. I am hostile.
Okay.
How do you deploy the framework's meeting reset?
The moment the tone crosses from frustrated to abusive, I stop engaging with the content of the argument entirely. I wouldn't defend the grade. I would simply stand up, gather my notes, look you directly in the eye with a calm, flat effect, and say, I am ending this meeting now as the tone has become unprofessional. We can resume when we can communicate with mutual respect. Then I walk out the door.
I am ending this meeting now as the tone has become unprofessional.
Yeah.
You are not asking for permission to leave. You are stating a fact.
You do not ask for permission to be treated with basic human dignity. You possess the absolute professional sovereignty to physically or digitally, if it's a Zoom call, remove yourself from a hostile environment.
And doing so is not giving up on the student. It is fiercely upholding the integrity of your profession.
Exactly.
I can feel the adrenaline spike just thinking about doing that.
Oh, it's terrifying the first time.
But anyone who has worked in a toxic school environment knows exactly what the fallout of that action will be. The parent is going to leave that room, march directly into the principal's office, and spin a wild, distorted narrative about how the teacher was the aggressive one, how the teacher stormed out and refused to help their child.
Yes, they will.
And because the administrator wants to avoid parental conflict, they gaslight the teacher. So how do we survive the fallout of holding that boundary?
The meeting reset is only half of the strategy. It must be immediately, without hesitation, followed by the deployment of the digital anchor.
The digital anchor. Okay, let's role play this sequence immediately following the confrontation. I have just walked out of that hostile conference. My heart is pounding. My hands might literally be shaking with adrenaline. I walk straight to my desk. What exactly am I typing? The framework specifies using the observation impact boundary structure.
Right, and the key here is speed and sterility. It must be utterly devoid of emotion, strictly factual, and sent immediately to yourself and your direct supervisor.
Okay.
You are creating an irrefutable, time-stamped paper trail before the other party even makes it to the parking lot.
Okay, so I open my email. I type. At 2:15 p.m., Mr. Smith began shouting and using profane language during our scheduled conference. This hindered our ability to maintain a productive focus on student outcomes. I ended the meeting, and moving forward, I have moved all communication with this parent to email only to ensure a documented professional record.
Boom, 2 sentences.
And that is all you need.
By establishing that digital anchor immediately, you completely neutralize the he said, she said dynamic. You have locked in the factual narrative.
So if the administrator tries to question you later, you don't argue. You just refer them back to the time-stamped anchor.
Which highlights one of the most empowering mantras in the entire source document. Documentation is a shield, not a second job.
Documentation is a shield, not a second job.
That is critical. Over-documenting is often a trauma response from teachers who feel constantly attacked.
Yeah, they write these 3-page emails detailing every single grievance because they are desperate to be believed.
But a 3-page emotional email gives a hostile parent or admin 50 different subjective points to argue with.
Right.
A two-sentence digital anchor or a single M on a pulse sheet provides zero surface area for argument. Documentation is a shield, not a second job. It should take seconds to deploy.
Which brings up a really complex reality. We spent a lot of time discussing how to hold boundaries against deliberate hostility and willful disengagement.
Yeah.
But as educators, we also know that sometimes resistance isn't a conscious choice. Sometimes a student putting their head down isn't about power or apathy. Sometimes it is deeply biological.
This is the necessary pivot toward the neuroclinical foundation of inclusion.
Right.
If we are going to own the environment, we have to understand how human brains interact with that environment. We have to stop viewing all behavioral resistance as a personality defect and start recognizing it as a profile mismatch.
A massive percentage of what the traditional system labels as a defiant, lazy, or unmotivated student is actually a student experiencing a catastrophic failure of executive functioning, or EF.
Exactly.
Assuming you listening are familiar with the basic concepts of working memory and cognitive load theory, let's talk about the friction of what happens when those systems are overwhelmed.
Yeah.
When a teacher is operating as a transmitter, talking fast, providing dense worksheets, creating a high-pressure, noisy environment, they are dramatically increasing the extraneous load.
And the student's working memory is hijacked, just trying to process the noise and the complex formatting.
There is literally no cognitive bandwidth left to process the actual concept. So the brain does what it is biologically programmed to do when overwhelmed. It shuts down, or it acts out to escape the environment.
When you understand that biological mechanism, providing those dignified access points, like a clean, simple visual map, isn't about lowering your academic standards. It is about aggressively reducing that extraneous load so the working memory can actually access the rigorous concept.
You are clearing the biological pathway.
Exactly.
This neurological perspective fundamentally removes the personal offense we take when a student struggles. And the sources draw a brilliant, vital distinction here that completely changes how we view extreme opposition in the classroom, the difference between ODD and PDA.
This is perhaps the most critical nuance for anyone managing behavior. ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, is the traditional lens. It is characterized as a behavioral choice, a deliberate struggle for power, control, and authority.
It's the kid who actively wants to win the argument and defeat the teacher.
Right. But PDA, pathological demand avoidance, which is increasingly recognized as a specific profile on the autism spectrum, operates on a completely different neurological pathway.
Oh, wow.
For a student with the PDA profile, an everyday demand, even something as benign as "please open your book," is not processed as a simple instruction. Their amygdala, the brain's primal fear center, perceives that demand as a literal, physical threat to their autonomy and survival.
Wait, really? Their brain reacts to open your book the same way it would react to a predator in the room?
Yes.
That is staggering.
So their extreme resistance, their explosive behavior, or their complete shutdown isn't a calculated ploy for power. It is their autonomous nervous system executing a fight-or-flight response against a massive influx of uncontrollable anxiety.
Now, I need to institute a hard constraint check right here. The framework is explicit, and we must be explicit. Educators, leaders, and managers are not clinicians. We are not diagnosing students.
Absolutely.
We do not practice medicine, and we do not label children.
The moment we try to play doctor, we step out of our environment and create massive liability.
So what is the actual practical utility of understanding the difference between ODD and PDA if we aren't using it to diagnose?
It allows us to practice informed empathy by altering our environmental inputs.
Okay.
If you understand that direct demands can trigger an amygdala hijack, you fundamentally change how you communicate. You shift away from imperative language and move entirely to declarative language.
Let's give a concrete example of that friction. Imperative language is a direct command. Finish your visual map right now. Sit down. Stop talking.
Right. And to a dysregulated nervous system, that is a threat.
Whereas declarative language is simply making an observation about the environment.
Exactly. Instead of a command, you walk by the student's desk and casually observe, "I'm noticing there are still some blank spaces on this map." Or, "I see the pencils are still in the box."
You are not demanding action.
No, you are stating a neutral fact and allowing their brain the autonomy to process that fact without feeling cornered. It completely bypasses the threat response.
It is a microscopic shift in phrasing that yields massive behavioral dividends.
It really does.
But keeping up with all this clinical research, EF, cognitive load, amygdala responses, it's exhausting.
Who has the time?
Right. But the framework offers a deeply modern solution to this, leveraging generative AI as a clinical translator.
This is how we bridge the gap between dense neurological journals and Tuesday morning period 1.
Right.
If you have a student demonstrating severe task initiation failure, you do not need to spend your weekend reading medical white papers. You use an AI tool, input the specific behavioral barrier, student shuts down when presented with multi-step written instructions, and prompt it to act as a clinical translator.
You ask it to generate 3 low-effort, high-impact environmental modifications based on executive functioning research.
And it keeps you in the role of the environment architect, utilizing the AI to do the heavy research lifting.
Okay, so we have unpacked the psychology, we have the mindsets, we have the meeting resets, the pulse sheets, the declarative language, and the 3 doors.
Yeah, that's a lot of tools.
But a tool belt is utterly useless if you don't have the systemic discipline to actually wear it. How do we ensure we don't slide right back into the burnout trap the moment things get stressful?
Which brings us to our final strategy. Scaling the Zen mountain through baselines and audits.
The Zen Mountain baseline, that's the foundation of professional sovereignty.
It is. It is about establishing proactive, immovable rules of engagement long before a conflict ever arises. It consists of 3 specific anchors. The first is the sunset rule.
The sunset rule is a formal public notification, usually placed in your email signature and your syllabus, stating that you process and respond to all communications strictly within 24 business hours.
You are explicitly stating that you do not respond immediately and you do not respond at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday.
And we have to acknowledge the immense societal guilt that teachers feel when they first implement this. They feel like they are abandoning their post.
But the sunset rule is what protects your presence in the classroom during the day by protecting your physiological recovery at night.
The second anchor is the preferred channel.
You designate one single official channel for all stakeholder communication. If it's a specific app or your official email, that is the only place you conduct business.
Right. So if a parent somehow texts your personal cell phone, you do not text back.
Never. You reply the next day on the official channel. This guarantees your documentation shield is always intact and time-stamped.
And the third anchor is the post-conversation anchor, which we discussed with the digital anchor. Every verbal hallway conversation or phone call that involves a decision or a conflict is immediately followed by a 2-sentence factual summary email.
Those 3 anchors, the sunset rule, the preferred channel, and the post-conversation anchor, they create an impenetrable fortress around your professional time and energy.
And inside that fortress, you execute the final piece of the framework, the weekly ritual that ensures you actually survive the year. The sources call this the sovereignty audit.
The sovereignty audit is designed to be executed every single Friday afternoon in the quiet moments right before you close your laptop and leave the building. It is a systematic mechanism to detach from the week's guilt.
You look at your practices and ask yourself 3 very specific questions. Let's run through them.
Okay.
Question 1. Did I consistently provide dignified access points, the academic, narrative, or visual doors for the core concepts this week?
Question 2. For the students who actively chose to disengage, did I faithfully execute the inform and move on protocol and document it on my pulse sheet?
In question 3. Did I fiercely uphold my sunset rule, refusing to engage with non-emergency communication outside of my contract hours?
If you can look at those 3 questions and answer yes, then your professional obligation is entirely fulfilled. You have executed your role flawlessly.
You can pack your bag, walk to your car, and enter your weekend with a completely clear conscience, entirely insulated from the anxiety of other people's choices.
Sounds amazing, right?
It does. Okay, I want to crystallize this massive paradigm shift for you listening. I'm going to deliver a rapid-fire, one-breath recap of this entire framework, a 20-second tool recap to lock this into your brain. Here we go. Your peaceful educator arsenal starts with your Zen Mountain baseline. That is your sunset rule, your preferred communication channel, and your post-conversation anchor. When student engagement drops, you immediately execute the inform and move on protocol tracked cleanly on your pulse sheet. If a stakeholder becomes hostile, you deploy the meeting reset to maintain your boundaries, followed instantly by a factual digital anchor email. To ensure equitable, rigorous access for all profiles, you build the 3 doors: academic, narrative, visual for differentiated learning, and you cap it all off every single Friday afternoon with your sovereignty audit so you can go home in absolute peace.
That is the blueprint for professional survival.
It truly is, and it fundamentally redefines our understanding of what it means to be a professional. The framework calls this the professionalism paradox. We have been culturally conditioned to believe that quietly absorbing abuse, working ourselves into the ground, and sacrificing our personal lives is the ultimate mark of a dedicated professional.
But the data and the reality of burnout proves the exact opposite. True professionalism is not passivity. True professionalism is the rigorous active maintenance of high standards.
Right.
If you allow your environment to be degraded by abuse, or if you lower your cognitive expectations simply to avoid conflict, you're no longer functioning as an educator, you are functioning as an enabler.
Protecting your peace is not a selfish luxury. It is a fundamental ethical obligation.
Because a burnt-out, exhausted teacher or burnt-out leader in any industry is a deeply diminished resource,
Right.
operating sustainably so that you can return to the work year after year. Survival is a service.
Survival is a service. I want that printed on a billboard.
I know, right?
As we wrap up this deep dive, I have a specific one-week challenge for you, the listener. Consider this your graduation from the Peaceful Educator framework. Look back at the tool belt we just unpacked. I'm challenging you to install just one of these tools into your life this week.
Just one.
Just one. Maybe you finally add that sunset rule to your email signature. Maybe you practice using declarative language instead of commands. Or maybe, this Friday, you sit down and run your first sovereignty audit. Just pick one and take that definitive first step toward reclaiming ownership of your environment.
And as you take that step, I want to leave you with a broader, perhaps more provocative thought to consider.
Okay.
We have spent this entire hour discussing the mechanics of boundaries, how to build shields, how to let go of the exhausting burden of forcing others to care. But consider the long-term societal impact of this shift. We are rapidly moving into a technologically advanced, AI-driven world where direct hand-holding and micromanagement are obsolete.
Very true.
If we continue to operate as transmitters, if we artificially shield students from the pain of failure, and if we do the heavy lifting for them, we are actively disabling them. By stepping back, by forcing them to own their effort and face their own outcomes, we aren't just saving our own sanity. We might actually be providing them with the only skill self-directed autonomous resilience that will allow them to survive the future.
By letting them fail safely now, we ensure they don't fail permanently later. And the energy you save by stepping back, that energy is finally yours to keep. So the next time it's 9 p.m. on a Tuesday and you see that tense email pop up in your inbox, you don't have to feel that familiar knot of panic. You don't have to hyperventilate blowing on the sails. You can take a deep breath, close the laptop, and rest, knowing with absolute certainty that you own the environment and they own the effort.